I heard knocking from the walls, but no one was there. If you like the story, please subscribe to help me bring more stories like this. Now let's get started. The dim afternoon light filtered through the grimy windows as Alex carried the last box into their new apartment. The place was a far cry from luxurious, but it was all they could afford. Found through an obscure forum buried deep within the layers of the internet, the listing had seemed too good to be true. Spacious rooms, low rent, and no credit checks. Desperation had drowned out any suspicions, and within a week of contacting the mysterious landlord, Alex was standing in the creaky, dimly lit hallway of their new home. The building itself had seen better days. Its peeling wallpaper and flickering overhead lights gave it a decrepit charm, if charm was the right word. The other tenants were a strange assortment. Most kept their heads down, shuffling past Alex without so much as a nod. A few doors down, an older woman peeked out through a crack in her door, her one visible eye tracking Alex as they struggled to move in their belongings. The uneasy tension in the hallway felt almost tangible, like the air itself was watching. Inside, the apartment was sparsely furnished. A worn-out couch sat in the corner, accompanied by a small dining table with mismatched chairs. The kitchen was outdated, with scuffed countertops and a stove that looked like it hadn't worked in decades. But it was livable. For Alex, that was enough. As they unpacked, the first knock came. It was faint, barely audible, and Alex dismissed it as noise from a neighboring unit. The walls were thin, and the building was old. It was probably just the plumbing or someone hammering something in the apartment next door. But as the evening wore on, the sound persisted. It wasn't constant, but it was deliberate. A slow, rhythmic tap, 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 spaced just far enough apart to make it impossible to ignore. By midnight, Alex had begun to feel the weight of the sound. The knocks seemed to move, originating from different parts of the apartment. First, it was the wall near the kitchen, then behind the couch, and later near the bathroom. Exhausted, Alex crawled into bed, pulling the covers up tight. The knocking continued, but they told themselves it was nothing, just the building settling, just old pipes creaking. It had to be. The following morning, the knocks were gone. Sunlight streamed through the windows, revealing the cracks in the walls and the scuffed hardwood floors. Alex chalked up the noises to the quirks of an old building and busied themselves with unpacking. By the time the afternoon rolled around, they were feeling more settled. The apartment didn't seem so bad in the light of day, but as dusk fell, the atmosphere shifted. The knocking returned, louder this time, and with a strange precision. Alex sat on the couch, trying to focus on their laptop, but the noise seemed to demand their attention. It wasn't random, it had a pattern. 3 knocks, a pause, 2 knocks, another pause, and then 3 more. It repeated over and over like a code. Alex couldn't ignore it anymore. They pressed their ear to the wall where the sound was loudest, trying to make sense of it. It didn't sound like plumbing or creaking wood. It sounded intentional. "Hello?" Alex called out, feeling foolish as soon as the word left their lips. There was no response, just the same unrelenting knocks. Frustrated, they banged their fist against the wall. "Cut it out!" they shouted. For a moment, the knocking stopped. Alex let out a relieved sigh and turned away, only to freeze in place when the knocking resumed, this time directly behind them. Spinning around, Alex stared at the wall. There was nothing there. No hole, no pipe, no vent, just the cracked plaster. The sound continued steady and deliberate, as if someone or something was knocking from the other side. Their chest tightened and a cold sweat broke out on their brow. They backed away slowly, their breath shallow. Over the next few days, the knocking became a fixture of Alex's life. It followed them from room to room, always seeming to originate just behind the nearest wall. They tried to ignore it, blasting music through their headphones and distracting themselves with work. But the sound always found a way through. It was relentless. The other tenants offered no solace. When Alex mentioned the noise to the older woman, who always seemed to be watching, she simply shook her head. "Don't talk about it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's better if you don't." Before Alex could press her further, she closed her door, the lock clicking into place. By the end of the week, Alex was at their wits' end. They spent hours scouring the apartment for an explanation. They checked the walls for loose panels, inspected the floors for hidden crawl spaces, and even climbed onto a chair to examine the ceiling. Nothing. The apartment was solid, unremarkable, but the knocking remained. Late one night, as the knocking seemed to grow louder and more insistent, Alex grabbed their phone and started recording. They stood in the center of the room, spinning slowly as they captured the sound echoing from every corner. When they played back the video, their hearts sank. The knocking wasn't the only sound. Beneath it, faint and distorted, was something else, something that sent a chill down Alex's spine. It was a whisper, just barely audible. They rewound the video, holding the phone close to their ear, straining to make out the words. "Help me," the voice said, soft and broken. "Let me out." Alex's hands trembled as they set the phone down, the distorted whispers still echoing in their mind. "Help me. Let me out." The words carried a haunting desperation, yet they also felt like a warning. Who or what was behind the walls, and why did it want Alex to hear? Sleep was out of the question that night. They sat awake on the couch, the knocking now a constant, maddening rhythm that seemed to surround them. By morning, Alex convinced themselves it was just a prank. Maybe the walls were thin, and a neighbor was having some twisted fun. But as they moved through their day, the knocking followed. It wasn't just random noise anymore, it was deliberate. If Alex moved to the kitchen, the knocking shifted to the wall behind the stove. If they sat in the living room, it came from behind the couch. No matter where they went, the sound was always there, trailing them like a shadow. The breaking point came one night when Alex decided to test the theory. Sitting cross-legged on the floor, they waited for the knocking to begin. As soon as it started, 3 sharp taps on the wall to their left. They knocked back. Tap, tap. The knocking stopped. Alex held their breath, their pulse pounding in their ears. Then it returned. Tap, tap. It was responding. A chill ran down Alex's spine. "Is someone there?" they whispered, their voice barely audible. The knocking didn't stop this time. Instead, it became more erratic, as though whoever or whatever was on the other side had become excited. The sound moved across the walls in rapid succession, a chaotic flurry of knocks that seemed to encircle Alex. They scrambled to their feet, backing away from the walls. "This isn't funny," they shouted. But the knocking didn't stop. It only grew louder. Desperation set in. Alex grabbed their phone and began recording again, determined to capture the noise and prove they weren't losing their mind. "If you're real, do it again," they said, their voice shaky. The knocking responded instantly, a series of sharp taps that reverberated through the room. Alex felt their stomach drop. This wasn't random. This wasn't plumbing. It wasn't the building settling. It was communication. For hours, Alex sat frozen, watching the shadows on the walls dance in the flickering light of the overhead bulb. The knocking didn't stop, but it changed. It grew softer, more deliberate, like it was trying to convey a message. Alex began to recognize patterns. 3 knocks, a pause, then 2 more. It was almost rhythmic, like a kind of code. They grabbed a notepad and began scribbling down the sequences, convinced there was some meaning hidden within them. The first few patterns didn't make sense, but then a thought struck Alex. Morse code. With trembling hands, they opened a browser on their phone and pulled up a chart. Translating the knocks, they pieced together the first word, help. Alex's heart raced. "Help?" they said aloud, as if addressing the unseen entity. The knocking paused. Then it resumed, another series of knocks echoing through the room. Alex translated again. "Me. Help me," they whispered, the phrase sending a fresh wave of fear through them. The knocking stopped for a moment, the silence almost deafening. Then a new sequence began, faster this time. Alex scrambled to decode it. There, they didn't get the chance to finish. A loud, deliberate bang came from the far corner of the room, as though something had slammed into the wall with tremendous force. Alex jumped, the notepad falling from their hands. The knocking had changed. It wasn't rhythmic anymore. It was frantic, desperate. Suddenly the lights flickered, plunging the room into brief darkness before coming back on. Alex's phone buzzed in their hand, a notification flashing across the screen. It was a text from an unknown number. The message simply read, "Don't trust it." Alex stared at the screen, their breath catching in their throat. Who had sent the message? They tried to reply, but the message wouldn't send. Instead, the phone buzzed again, another message appearing. "It's lying, don't answer it." Before Alex could process the warning, the knocking returned, louder than ever. This time, it was accompanied by a voice. It was faint at first, barely audible over the sound of the knocks. But as Alex strained to listen, the words became clearer. "Please, I'm trapped. Let me out." The voice sounded human, broken and pleading, like someone on the verge of tears. Alex approached the wall cautiously, their heart hammering. "Who are you?" they asked, their voice trembling. The voice didn't answer. Instead, the knocking shifted, growing softer, almost gentle, as if coaxing Alex closer. They pressed their ear to the wall, listening intently. The voice spoke again. "I've been here so long. Please help me." "Are you inside the walls?" Alex asked, their mind racing. The idea was absurd, but everything about this situation defied logic. The voice didn't respond directly. Instead, it repeated, "Let me out." Alex's phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with another message. "It's not what it seems." Torn between fear and sympathy, Alex stepped back from the wall, their minds spinning. The knocking resumed, more insistent now, as though whatever was inside could sense their hesitation. The voice called out again, pleading, sobbing. It felt so real, so human. But the messages on the phone had planted a seed of doubt. "Why should I trust you?" Alex asked the wall. The voice hesitated, and for a moment the room was eerily silent. Then it spoke again, its tone colder, sharper. "Because you don't have a choice." The voice's chilling words lingered in Alex's mind long after the knocking ceased. "Because you don't have a choice." Sleep was out of the question. The air in the apartment felt heavier, oppressive, as if the walls themselves were watching. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the lights, made Alex's pulse quicken. The sense of being trapped was inescapable. By morning, Alex's exhaustion was matched only by their growing paranoia. The voice, the knocking, the cryptic messages on their phone, it all pointed to something far beyond normal. Determined to find answers, they decided to dig deeper into the apartment's history. There had to be a reason for the strange occurrences, a thread that tied everything together. Alex began by questioning the building's few tenants. Most avoided eye contact, brushing off their questions with vague excuses. "Old buildings make noise," one tenant muttered before hurrying away. Another simply shook their head and walked off, as if Alex's curiosity was something dangerous. Only the older woman who had been watching Alex on move-in day offered anything resembling an answer. "You hear it, don't you?" she asked, her voice low and trembling. Her eyes darted nervously to the hallway as if expecting someone or something to be listening. "Yes," Alex replied. "The knocking, the voice, what is it?" The woman sighed, her shoulders sagging under the weight of an invisible burden. "You should leave," she said. "This building, it's not safe. It never was." "Why?" Alex pressed. "What's wrong with it?" She hesitated, glancing around once more before speaking. "This place has a history," she said. "People move in, but they don't always move out. The walls, they have a way of keeping things. Secrets. Lives." "What do you mean, keeping things?" Alex asked, their skin crawling. The woman didn't answer. Instead, she stepped back into her apartment and closed the door, the sound of multiple locks clicking into place echoing in the empty hallway. Frustrated but undeterred, Alex turned to the internet. A search for the building's name yielded little, just a few generic articles about its construction in the 1920s. But when Alex added the word disappearances to the search, the results changed. Buried in obscure forums and old newspaper clippings, they began to piece together a dark and troubling pattern. Over the past several decades, numerous tenants had vanished from the building without explanation. Police investigations turned up nothing, and the cases were eventually closed as runaways or accidental deaths. One article mentioned a young woman who had gone missing after telling her friends she'd heard something living in the walls. Another detailed the disappearance of a man whose apartment was found completely empty, as though he'd never been there at all. The deeper Alex dug the stranger the stories became. One thread on a forgotten forum was particularly chilling. A former tenant described hearing knocks and whispers coming from the walls, much like Alex had. They'd tried to investigate, but claimed the walls seemed to move when touched, as if alive. The tenant had abruptly stopped posting after saying they planned to get to the bottom of it. At the bottom of the thread, a single comment stood out. "If you hear the knocking, it's already too late. The walls watch. And when the knocking starts, it means it's chosen you." Alex's blood ran cold. They leaned back in their chair, the weight of the words sinking in. Chosen. What did that mean? Was this some kind of haunting? Or was it something worse? The knocking wasn't random and neither was the voice, but why them? Why now? Their phone buzzed, pulling them from their thoughts. Another message from the unknown number appeared. "Stop digging." Alex's chest tightened. Was someone watching them? They glanced around the apartment, their eyes darting to the corners of the room. The oppressive feeling returned, stronger, now as though the walls themselves were leaning in. The phone buzzed again. "It's watching you, don't let it see your fear." Panic set in. Alex grabbed their things and left the apartment, desperate for fresh air and distance from the suffocating atmosphere. As they stepped outside, the building loomed behind them, its cracked facade and broken windows seeming to leer in silent judgment. The escape was brief. Alex had no other place to go, and by nightfall, they reluctantly returned. The apartment was unnervingly quiet when they walked in. For a moment, Alex dared to hope the nightmare was over, but as they closed the door, the knocking started again. This time, it was louder, sharper, and more purposeful. Alex froze, their pulse pounding in their ears. Grabbing their phone, they recorded the sound, hoping to catch something definitive. But when they played back the recording, the knocking wasn't the only thing they heard. Beneath it was the same voice, distorted and faint. "You can't escape, it's too late." Desperation drove Alex to take drastic action. They began inspecting the apartment, searching for anything that might explain what was happening. They tapped on the walls, feeling for hollow spots, and shone a flashlight into every crack and crevice. Finally, in the far corner of the bedroom, they found something. A loose panel in the wall. Their hands shook as they pried it open, revealing a small, hidden space. Inside was a pile of old, yellowed papers covered in strange symbols and drawings. The symbols were jagged and angular, unlike any language Alex had ever seen. Among the papers was a faded photograph of a man standing in front of the building, a triumphant smile on his face. Written on the back were the words, "Hollow, 1926, the beginning." Beneath the photo was a single sheet of paper with words scrawled in shaky handwriting. "Don't listen to it. Don't trust the voice. The walls lie." The message on the paper, "Don't listen to it. Don't trust the voice. The walls lie," echoed in Alex's mind as they stared at the crumpled page. Their fingers trembled, and they instinctively glanced toward the walls as if expecting them to react. The air in the room felt thick, heavy with an oppressive energy that made it hard to breathe. What did it mean that the walls could lie? And if the voice wasn't trustworthy, what was it leading them toward? Desperate for answers, Alex thought back to how they had found the apartment in the first place, through the deep web. The obscure listing, the strange lack of a background check, the landlord who had only communicated through vague one-line emails. It all seemed suspicious now. What if this wasn't just a coincidence? What if they had been lured here on purpose? Determined, Alex booted up their laptop and reopened the Tor browser. They navigated through the maze of anonymous links, retracing their steps until they found the original site where the listing had been posted. The page looked the same as before: plain black background, minimal text, and a single photograph of the building. But something was different. A new line of text had appeared beneath the photo. "Welcome back. We've been waiting." Alex's blood ran cold. They hesitated, their cursor hovering over the page before clicking on a small hidden link at the bottom of the site. The screen flashed, and they were redirected to a forum titled Paranormal Properties. The forum was chaotic, with dozens of threads, each dedicated to different buildings, houses, and landmarks rumored to be haunted or cursed. Scanning the list, Alex's eyes landed on one thread in particular, the Hollow building. They clicked on it, their breath quickening as the page loaded. The thread was extensive, filled with posts from people claiming to have lived, or at least stayed, in the building. Many of the stories sounded eerily familiar. One user described hearing faint knocking on their first night. Another claimed they'd heard voices begging for help. A third wrote about seeing the walls shift, as though the building itself were alive. Alex scrolled further, stopping at a post from someone named Lost189. If you're hearing the knocking, it's already started. The walls aren't just walls, they're part of something bigger, something alive, and the voice? It's not a person. It's part of the building, it's how it draws you in. A reply to the post caught Alex's attention. Do not let the knocking in. If you do, you'll never leave. The building doesn't just want you, it wants your fear. That's how it grows. Alex's heart raced. The idea that the building was alive, that it fed on fear and lured people in through the deep web, was horrifying. But it explained so much. The voice, the knocking, the oppressive atmosphere that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. Scrolling further, Alex found a link to a hidden document titled The Builder's Pact. They clicked on it, and a PDF loaded on the screen. The document detailed the history of the building, constructed in the 1920s by a man named Elijah Hollow, the same man from the photograph Alex had found. Hollow, according to the document, was an eccentric architect obsessed with creating living spaces that transcended traditional design. But his ambitions went beyond architecture. The document claimed Hollow had made a pact with an entity referred to only as the Builder. In exchange for the building's construction, the entity would imbue it with life, but at a cost. The building required sustenance, and that sustenance was the lives and fear of its tenants. Over the decades, countless people had vanished within its walls, their disappearances dismissed as coincidences or unsolved mysteries. The knocking, Alex realized, wasn't just a symptom of the haunting. It was the building choosing its next victim. Their phone buzzed, breaking their concentration. A message from the unknown number flashed on the screen. You're getting too close. Stop. Alex stared at the message, a mix of fear and defiance welling up inside them. If someone, or something, was trying to stop them, it meant they were on the right track. Ignoring the warning, they returned to the forum, looking for any clues about how to escape the building. One post stood out, written in shaky, fragmented sentences. The anchor. It's in the walls. Destroy it, and you might be free. But be warned. It won't let you get close without a fight. It knows. It always knows. The anchor. Alex's thoughts immediately turned to the loose panel in the wall and the strange symbols and papers they had found. Was the anchor hidden somewhere, deeper within the apartment? And if so, how could they find it without the building turning against them? The knocking began again, louder and more erratic this time. It echoed from every direction as if the entire apartment were alive with sound. Alex turned off their laptop and grabbed a flashlight, determined to investigate further. They couldn't afford to wait. If the anchor was the key to escaping, they had to find it before it was too late. As they moved through the apartment, the knocking seemed to follow them, growing more intense with each step. The walls vibrated slightly under their touch, a faint hum resonating beneath the surface. It was as if the building knew what they were doing and it didn't like it. In the corner of the living room, Alex found another loose panel. Their hands shook as they pried it open, revealing another hidden space. This time there was no photograph or paper, just a small, jagged object wrapped in a faded cloth. It was heavy and cold, radiating an unsettling energy that made Alex's skin crawl. Unwrapping it, they found a strange black stone carved with the same symbols they had seen on the papers. Their phone buzzed again. Another message. Don't touch it. Alex ignored the warning, clutching the stone tightly. The knocking stopped abruptly, replaced by a deep, guttural groan that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The air grew colder, and the lights flickered violently. The building was angry. The deep, guttural groan reverberated through the apartment, shaking the walls as if the building itself was alive and angry. Alex's grip on the black stone tightened, its cold surface almost burning against their palm. The air in the room felt suffocating, dense with an energy that made every breath a struggle. The knocking had stopped, but the silence was far worse. It felt calculated, deliberate, like a predator circling its prey. Then the walls began to move. It started subtly. At first, Alex thought it was their imagination, shadows elongating unnaturally, cracks in the plaster seeming to shift positions. But as they stared, it became undeniable. The walls were pulsing, almost breathing, their surfaces rippling like water disturbed by an unseen force. The once familiar layout of the apartment began to twist, doors vanishing and reappearing in different places. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in like a living cage. Alex stumbled backward, clutching the stone tightly. "What the hell is this?" they muttered, their voice trembling. The apartment didn't respond in words, but the groan deepened, a sound that seemed to come from the very foundation of the building. The walls began to bleed, thin, dark streaks of a viscous liquid seeping from the cracks and pooling on the floor. The smell was overwhelming, metallic and acrid, making Alex gag. The black stone pulsed in their hand, a faint vibration that seemed to sync with the movements of the walls. Alex felt a strange connection to it, as if the object was somehow tied to the building's transformation. They held it up, examining the intricate symbols carved into its surface. The markings seemed to shift, almost alive, as though the stone was reacting to the chaos around it. Suddenly, the apartment shifted violently, throwing Alex to the floor. The impact knocked the wind out of them, and the stone slipped from their grasp, skittering across the room. As they scrambled to retrieve it, the walls stretched and bent, their surfaces warping into grotesque shapes. Faces began to emerge, distorted, anguished visages pressing against the plaster as if trapped beneath the surface. Their mouths moved silently, their expressions frozen in perpetual torment. Alex froze, their heart pounding. The faces weren't just random, they were familiar. One of them belonged to the man from the photograph they'd found behind the wall panel. Another was a woman who looked eerily similar to the tenant who had disappeared, according to the forum. Posts. The realization hit Alex like a blow. These weren't just faces. They were the souls of the building's victims. The groaning intensified, and the walls began to close in, the space shrinking with every passing second. The stone pulsed, violently now, its vibration almost painful. Alex lunged for it, their fingers brushing its surface just as the floor beneath them shifted, tilting at an impossible angle. They slid across the room, slamming into one of the bleeding walls. The liquid was cold and sticky, clinging to their skin as they struggled to stand. The voice returned, louder and more menacing than before. "You shouldn't have taken it!" Alex spun around, searching for the source of the voice. It seemed to come from everywhere, echoing through the distorted space. "What do you want? From me?" they shouted, their voice cracking. The walls answered with another groan, and the floor buckled beneath Alex's feet, forcing them to stumble forward. The stone pulsed again, its vibration syncing with the deep hum that filled the apartment. Alex clutched it tightly, realizing it was the only thing tethering them to reality. Without it, the building might consume them entirely. As the room twisted, further, Alex noticed something strange. The stone seemed to affect the walls. Wherever they held it, the faces retreated, the bleeding cracks sealing themselves temporarily. The building was fighting back, but the stone was holding its own, creating small pockets of stability amid the chaos. Alex's mind raced. If the stone was causing the building to react, it had to be important, perhaps even the anchor the forum had mentioned. Destroying it might be the key to escaping, but it could also unleash something even worse. They had no way of knowing what would happen, but staying in the apartment wasn't an option. Gripping the stone, Alex bolted toward the front door. It was no longer where it had been, the hallway beyond shifting like a maze. The walls stretched and twisted, blocking their path at every turn. The groaning sound grew louder, accompanied by whispers that filled the air, overlapping and incomprehensible. Stay. Belong. Become. The voices were insistent, each word laced with malice. Panic set in as Alex pushed forward, the walls closing, in tighter with every step. They could feel the building's anger, its presence overwhelming and all-encompassing. The hallway stretched endlessly, doors appearing and vanishing, each one leading back to the same distorted room. It was as if the apartment was toying with them, ensuring they could never leave. Alex stopped, gasping for breath. They pressed their back against the wall, clutching the stone as the whispers grew deafening. "You can't escape. You are ours." The faces reappeared, their mouths moving in unison as they spoke. Alex's skin crawled, but they forced themselves to stand. "I won't let you take me," they whispered, their voice filled with defiance. They raised the stone, holding it aloft as the faces recoiled. The walls shuddered violently, and for a brief moment, the hallway stabilized. A single door appeared at the far end, glowing faintly in the flickering light. Alex didn't hesitate. They ran toward the door, the stone vibrating wildly in their hand. The building fought back, the walls rippling and bending as if trying to swallow them whole. The door seemed impossibly far, but Alex pushed forward, their determination outweighing their fear. Just as they reached the door, the voice boomed again, louder than ever. "If you destroy it, you destroy yourself." Alex hesitated, their hand on the doorknob. The words echoed in their mind, planting a seed of doubt. Was the voice lying, or was it telling the truth? They glanced at the stone, its surface glowing faintly now, the symbols shifting faster than before. Behind them, the hallway began to collapse, the walls folding inward as the building's groans turned to an ear-piercing screech. There was no time to think. Alex opened the door and stepped through, clutching the stone tightly as the world around them dissolved into darkness. The door slammed shut behind Alex, plunging them into a suffocating darkness. The air felt thicker here, dense and unyielding, as though they'd stepped into another dimension entirely. The faint glow from the black stone in their hand was the only source of light, casting eerie shadows across the walls, or what should have been walls. The space around Alex defied logic, its boundaries shifting with each breath they took. For a moment, there was silence. No knocking, no groaning, no whispers, just an oppressive void that seemed to press in on all sides. Alex clutched the stone tightly, its faint vibration a small comfort in the overwhelming emptiness. But then, the stillness broke. A voice emerged. From the darkness, low and guttural. "You shouldn't have come here." Alex froze, their heart pounding. The voice was different this time. Not the pleading tone they'd heard from the walls before, but something far darker. It was cold, deliberate, and undeniably aware of their presence. "Who are you?" Alex demanded, their voice shaking. The stone in their hand pulsed, and the faint light it emitted grew brighter, illuminating the space around them. What they saw made their blood run cold. The walls were alive, shifting and undulating like the surface of a dark ocean. Faces pressed against the walls, distorted and screaming, their mouths moving silently in an eternal plea for release. And, at the center of the room stood a figure. It was tall and impossibly thin, its body cloaked in shadows that writhed and shifted like smoke. Its face, or lack thereof, was a void, an absence of features that made Alex's skin crawl. The figure exuded an aura of malice, its presence suffocating and overwhelming. "You've disturbed the balance," it said, its voice echoing unnaturally. "You were meant to feed the walls, not fight them." Alex's grip on the stone tightened. "What are you?" they asked, forcing themselves to stand tall despite the fear coursing through their veins. The figure tilted its head, its movements unnervingly smooth and deliberate. "I am the builder," it said. "I am the architect of this place, the keeper of its hunger. The walls are mine, and you are trespassing in my creation." The word sent a chill through Alex. The builder. The entity they'd read about in the deep web forums. The one who had made a pact with Elijah Hollow. The one who had turned the building into a living, breathing nightmare. "Why me?" Alex demanded, their voice rising with anger. "Why did you choose me?" The builder's form shifted, the shadows around it growing darker. "You came to us," it said. "Your curiosity brought you here. Your fear sustains us. Every knock, every whisper. It was a gift you gave willingly." The realization hit Alex like a blow. They had played into the building's trap, their own desperation and curiosity feeding the very entity that sought to consume them. But even as the fear threatened to overwhelm them, a spark of defiance flickered in Alex's chest. They weren't going to be another victim. You made a mistake, Alex said, their voice steady despite the terror clawing at their mind. I'm not here to feed you. I'm here to end this. The builder laughed, a sound that echoed through the shifting space like shattering glass. End this, it said, its tone mocking. You cannot end what you do not understand. The stone you hold is a fragment of me, a piece of the pact that binds this place. Destroy it, and you destroy yourself. Alex's hand shook as they looked at the stone. Was the builder telling the truth? Could destroying the anchor really mean their own destruction? The symbols on the stone glowed brighter, as though urging them to make a decision. You're lying, Alex said, their voice firm. The Forum said the anchor is the key. If I destroy this, I destroy your hold on this place. The builder's form surged forward, its shadowy tendrils stretching toward Alex. The Forums, it hissed, its voice dripping with disdain. You think the ramblings of the lost will save you? They were written by those who failed, those who fed the walls. The tendrils stopped inches from Alex, as if held back by the stone's faint light. The builder's form shuddered, its anger palpable. You cannot win, it said, its voice low and venomous. This place will consume you, as it has consumed so many before. Alex stared at the builder, their fear giving way to a growing resolve. The stone in their hand felt heavier now, its glow pulsating in time with their heartbeat. Maybe it will, they said, but I'm not going to make it easy for you. With a burst of courage, Alex raised the stone high and slammed it against the ground. The impact sent a shockwave through the space, the sound reverberating like a thunderclap. The builder let out a deafening roar, its form flickering and distorting as cracks spread across the walls. The faces in the walls screamed silently, their mouths opening wide as the building itself seemed to convulse. The stone cracked, its light growing brighter and brighter until it was blinding. Alex shielded their eyes, the overwhelming brilliance consuming everything around them. For a moment, there was nothing. No walls, no builder, no sound, just an infinite void of light. And then Alex opened their eyes. When Alex opened their eyes, they found themselves lying on the floor of the apartment. The room was eerily quiet, the oppressive atmosphere lifted. The walls no longer shifted and the bleeding cracks had vanished. For a moment, Alex thought they had succeeded, that destroying the stone had broken the building's hold. But as they sat up, they realized something was still very wrong. The apartment felt different, almost hollow. The light was dim, and the air carried an unnatural stillness like the calm before a storm. Alex's breath hitched as they noticed the black stone on the floor, cracked but still intact. Its faint glow pulsed rhythmically, as if mocking their attempt to destroy it. Suddenly a sound broke the silence, a low guttural whisper emanating from the walls. It wasn't the frantic knocking or pleading voice they'd heard before. This was deeper, more deliberate, a voice filled with malice and intent. You only delayed the inevitable, the voice said, resonating from every corner of the room. The stone is a fragment of me. It cannot be destroyed by mortal hands. Alex scrambled to their feet, their heart pounding. What do you want from me? They shouted, their voice echoing in the empty space. The walls began to darken, shadows, creeping across their surfaces like ink, spreading through water. Faces emerged again, but these were different, more defined, their expressions twisted in anguish and fury. One by one they began to speak, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of torment. We tried to escape, one voice cried. It won't let us go, said another. You brought it back, a third voice screamed, its tone accusatory. Alex backed away, their mind reeling. The faces stared at them with a mixture of desperation and hatred, their mouths moving in perfect unison as they spoke. You woke it up. A loud crack split the air, and the apartment trembled violently. Alex stumbled, clutching the edge of the desk for support. The black stone on the floor pulsed brighter, its fractured surface leaking a dark, viscous substance that seemed to seep into the floorboards. The voice from the walls returned, louder now, its tone triumphant. You want to understand, it said, the shadows around Alex growing thicker. Let me show you. Before Alex could react, the room dissolved into darkness. The air was cold and heavy, pressing against their chest like an unseen weight. Shapes began to emerge from the void, fragmented images that flickered like an old film reel. Alex saw the building as it had once been, newly constructed and pristine, its walls gleaming in the sunlight. The scene shifted, and Alex found themselves standing in a grand office. Behind the desk sat a man they recognized from the photograph they'd found earlier, Elijah Hollow. He was poring over blueprints, his eyes alight with a manic energy. On the table before him lay the black stone, whole and unblemished, its surface glowing faintly. Elijah's voice was clear, echoing in the void. "The builder promises greatness," he said, his tone reverent. "This building will be my legacy, a living monument to my genius." The shadows around the scene deepened, and a second figure appeared, a towering entity cloaked in darkness. Its form was indistinct, constantly shifting, but its presence was undeniable. The builder. It loomed over Elijah, its voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through Alex's very bones. "You understand the terms," the builder said. "This place will live, but it will require sustenance. You must provide it." Elijah hesitated, his hand hovering over the stone. "And if I don't?" he asked, his voice trembling. The builder leaned closer, its void-like face mere inches from Elijah's. "Then the building will devour itself," it said. "And you with it." Elijah's face twisted in anguish, but he nodded. "I accept." The scene shifted again, showing decades of the building's history. Tenants moved in, lived their lives, and slowly disappeared. The walls absorbed their fear, their pain, their very essence, sustaining the building and the entity within it. Each disappearance strengthened the builder's hold, the black stone glowing brighter with every life it consumed. Finally, the scene settled on Alex, standing in the center of the apartment, the stone clutched tightly in their hand. "The builder's voice echoed once more, its tone filled with dark satisfaction. "You are part of the story now," it said. "The building feeds on fear, and your fear is exquisite." Alex's surroundings snapped back into focus, the apartment materializing around them. They fell to their knees, gasping for breath, their mind reeling from what they had seen. The black stone sat before them, its fractured surface pulsing faintly. The truth was clear now. The building wasn't just alive, it was a prison, and the builder was its warden. But Alex wasn't ready to give up. The stone might not have been destroyed, but they had weakened it. The faces in the walls, the voices crying out. They weren't just victims, they were survivors, fragments of those who had been consumed but not entirely lost. Alex clung to the hope that if the builder could be weakened, it could be defeated. "I'm not going to let you win," Alex said, their voice steady despite the fear threatening to consume them. They picked up the stone, its cold surface sending a shiver through their body. The builder's laughter echoed through the apartment, but Alex ignored it. They had a plan. The builder's mocking laughter echoed through the apartment as Alex clutched the fractured stone, its faint glow pulsating with an unsettling rhythm. The faces in the walls had grown still, their anguished expressions frozen, watching Alex. With a mix of desperation and wary hope, the building seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for Alex's next move. The realization hit them like a bolt of lightning. The builder thrived on fear, on hesitation. Every second Alex spent doubting, their next step was feeding it. If they wanted to survive and free the souls trapped within the walls, they had to act now. "I'm not staying here," Alex muttered, their voice trembling but resolute. They opened their laptop and navigated back to the forum where they had first uncovered the building's dark secrets. Frantically searching, they revisited the thread about the Hollow building and scrolled through the cryptic posts, looking for anything they might have missed. One post caught their eye, its ominous title reading, "Escaping the Builder's Design." The post was long, written in disjointed, frantic sentences, but the message was clear. The building was a maze, designed to disorient and trap its victims. The only way out was to weaken the builder's hold by finding and destroying the root of its power. The stone, though part of the builder, was not its source. The real anchor was hidden deep within the building's structure, and finding it would require Alex to venture into the very heart of the nightmare. Another message followed, more cryptic than the first. "The walls will fight back. Follow the faces. They will show you the way, but beware. The builder is always watching. The knocking returned, louder and more erratic than ever. It moved rapidly across the apartment, as if the walls were panicking. Alex grabbed a flashlight and stuffed the fractured stone into their pocket. They didn't know where to start, but the instructions on the forum gave them a clue. Follow the faces. Turning toward the nearest wall, Alex watched as the faces began to move, their mouths opening and closing silently. One by one, they turned to face a single direction, their expressions pained but determined. "You're trying to help me," Alex whispered, a mix of gratitude and unease washing over them. They took a deep breath and followed the direction the faces pointed. The journey through the apartment was disorienting. The walls shifted and twisted, turning hallways into dead ends and doors into blank spaces. The faces in the walls guided Alex, their anguished expressions urging them forward. At times, the walls themselves seemed to come alive, bending and pulsing as if trying to block their path. The shadows grew darker, thicker, and the builder's voice taunted Alex at every turn. "You cannot escape me," it hissed, its tone dripping with malice. "This place is mine, and so are you," Alex pressed on, ignoring the voice. The faces led them to a section of the apartment they had never seen before, a narrow, dark corridor lined with doors. The air here was colder, and the knocking was deafening, echoing from all directions. Alex's flashlight flickered, its beam struggling against the oppressive darkness. One door at the end of the corridor stood out. It was older than the others, its wood warped and splintered with strange symbols carved into its surface. The faces in the walls turned toward it, their expressions pleading. Alex hesitated, the weight of the moment settling over them. This doctor wasn't just an exit, it was the threshold to something far worse. Their phone buzzed in their pocket, the screen lighting up with another message from the unknown number. "This is your last chance to turn back." Alex ignored it, gripping the door handle. It was cold, almost burning to the touch, and resisted when they tried to turn it. Gritting their teeth, Alex forced the door open, stepping into a vast, cavernous space that defied logic. The room was massive, its walls stretching into darkness. The floor was uneven, made of jagged stone, and the air was filled with the same acrid smell that had seeped from the walls earlier. At the center of the space was a massive, pulsating structure, a heart of shadows and stone, its surface covered in the same symbols etched onto the black stone in Alex's pocket. The anchor. The builder's voice boomed louder and more furious than ever. "You think you can destroy this? Foolish mortal. You will die here, like all the others." The walls of the cavern began to move, shifting and closing in as shadowy tendrils reached toward Alex. They pulled the fractured stone from their pocket, its glow now matching the rhythm of the pulsating anchor. The connection was undeniable. This stone was part of the builder, and destroying the anchor would sever its hold. But the builder wasn't going to let that happen. The tendrils lashed out, one of them wrapping around Alex's leg and pulling them to the ground. They screamed, kicking and thrashing as the shadow tightened its grip. The fractured stone fell from their hand, skittering across the floor toward the anchor. Alex reached for it, but the builder's tendrils were relentless, dragging them closer to the edge of the room. Desperation surged through them, and they grabbed a shard of jagged stone from the ground, slashing at the shadowy tendril. It recoiled with a screech, giving Alex just enough time to lunge for the fractured stone. Clutching it tightly, they staggered toward the anchor, the builder's voice growing more frantic. "Stop, you don't know what you're doing!" The faces in the walls screamed silently, their mouths open in horror as Alex raised the stone high above their head. "I'm ending this," Alex said through gritted teeth, and with all their strength, they brought the fractured stone down onto the anchor. The impact was deafening, a blinding light exploding from the center of the room as the anchor cracked and split apart. The builder let out an ear-piercing scream, its shadowy form writhing violently as the cavern began to collapse. The faces in the walls faded, their expressions softening into relief before vanishing entirely. Alex barely had time to react as the ground beneath them gave way, and they plunged into the darkness below. The fall felt endless, a dizzying descent into darkness that pressed against Alex's chest and filled their ears with a deafening roar. The fractured stone had slipped from their grasp during the fall, its faint glow disappearing into the void. Panic set in as Alex flailed helplessly, the sensation of weightlessness overwhelming. Then, with a bone-jarring thud, they hit solid ground. Gasping for air, Alex pushed themselves upright, their body aching from the impact. The space around them was nothing like the apartment or the cavern they had left behind. It was vast and featureless, a void of shifting shadows and faint, pulsing lights that seemed to beat in rhythm with their own heart. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint whisper of an unseen wind. "You think you've won?" The builder's voice echoed, impossibly loud, reverberating through the space like a storm. "You've only made it worse." Alex turned, in every direction, searching for the source of the voice. The shadows around them began to coalesce, forming a towering figure that loomed impossibly large. It was the builder, but this time its form was clearer, more human-like. Though still shrouded in twisting darkness, its face remained a void, but its presence was overwhelming, radiating malice and power. "You destroyed the anchor, the E," Builder said, its tone cold and measured. "Do you know what you've unleashed?" Alex stumbled backward, their pulse racing. "You were the one trapping people," they said, their voice trembling but defiant. "The walls, the faces, they were your victims. You fed on them." The builder tilted its head, a mocking gesture. "I sustained this place," it said. "This building was my creation, my legacy. The souls you pity so much chose their fate." The moment they stepped inside, "You lured them here," Alex shouted. "You preyed on their fear." The builder's form shuddered, its shadowy tendrils stretching and retracting like breathing lungs. "Fear is the foundation of all power," it said, "and your fear has made me stronger than ever." The shadows around Alex began to move, twisting and curling toward them like serpents. They stumbled back, their foot catching on something solid. Looking down, they saw the fractured stone lying at their feet. It pulsed faintly, its glow dim but steady, as if it was waiting for them to pick it up. The builder noticed. "That stone binds us," it said, its voice dripping with malice. "It is a piece of me. Destroying it will destroy you." Alex hesitated, the weight of the builder's words settling over them. The stone felt cold and heavy in their hand, its fractured surface radiating a strange energy. If the builder was telling the truth, breaking the stone could mean their own death. But leaving it intact would ensure the builder's power remained unbroken. The shadows surged forward, forcing Alex to act. They gripped the stone tightly, their knuckles white. "If I have to destroy myself to stop you," they said, their voice steady despite the fear clawing at their throat, "then so be it." The builder laughed, a sound that shook the very ground beneath Alex's feet. "Brave words," it said, "but you are no hero. You are mine." The shadows lunged, wrapping around Alex's legs and arms, pulling them to the ground. The pressure was immense, like being crushed by an invisible weight. The fractured stone pulsed violently in their hand, its glow growing brighter as the shadows closed in. Summoning every ounce of strength, Alex raised the stone high above their head. The builder's form flickered, its tendrils recoiling as if anticipating the blow. "Stop!" it roared, its voice a deafening crescendo. "You don't know what you're doing!" "I don't care!" Alex shouted, and with a primal scream, they brought the stone down onto the ground with all their might. The moment the stone shattered, the void exploded with light. The builder let out a horrific scream, its form disintegrating into shards of shadow that dissolved into the air. The light consumed everything, filling Alex's vision until there was nothing left but an infinite, blinding white. For a moment, there was silence. Then a voice, not the builder's but soft and familiar, whispered, "Thank you." The light faded and Alex found themselves back in the apartment. The walls were solid, the air still. The faces were gone, and the oppressive atmosphere had lifted. The black stone lay in pieces on the floor, its glow extinguished. Alex collapsed onto the couch, their body trembling with exhaustion and relief. But as they sat there, catching their breath, a faint knocking echoed from the wall behind them. Alex froze, their blood running cold. Turning slowly, they saw nothing, just the cracked plaster of the wall. The knocking came again, softer this time, like a distant echo. The faint knocking behind Alex was soft, almost hesitant, as though testing the boundaries of its existence. Their heart sank. Hadn't it ended? The anchor was destroyed, the builder vanquished. The apartment was supposed to be free. But the sound, the unmistakable rhythmic tapping, was a cruel reminder that something lingered. Alex rose from the couch, their legs shaky and unsteady. They approached the wall, their breath shallow, and pressed a trembling hand against the plaster. The surface felt solid, lifeless, just as it should. But the knocking continued, growing louder, more deliberate. Alex stepped back, their pulse racing. "No," they whispered, shaking their head. "You're gone. I destroyed you." The room grew colder, the oppressive atmosphere returning with each passing second. Shadows crept across the floor, coiling like snakes, and the familiar voice of the builder rumbled from the walls. "You thought it was that easy?" Alex froze. "No," they muttered, clutching their head as the voice filled the room. "I ended this. You're supposed to be gone." The builder laughed, a deep guttural sound that reverberated through the apartment. "You destroyed the anchor," it said, its tone mocking. "But the anchor was only part of me. You can break a chain, but the one who forged it remains. The E." Shadows around Alex grew darker, thicker as the walls began to ripple once more. The faces didn't reappear, but their absence felt more unsettling than their presence. It was as if the building itself had become a blank slate, ready for the builder to reshape as it saw fit. "You can't keep doing this," Alex shouted, their voice breaking. "I'll fight you again, You are nothing," the builder interrupted, its voice deafening. "Your fear sustains me. Your defiance is futile. You belong to me now." The walls began to close in, the apartment shrinking around Alex like a trap. The shadows coiled tighter, constricting their movements, forcing them to their knees. The fractured stone lay on the ground in pieces, its glow completely extinguished. Alex felt the despair creeping in, the overwhelming sense that no matter what they did, they would never escape. And then a thought struck them. The builder thrived on fear. It had said so itself. Every tenant it had consumed, every soul it had trapped, had fed it with their terror and desperation. But what if they refused to be afraid? What if instead of fighting they embraced the builder's darkness? Alex forced themselves to their feet, their breathing steadying as they pushed back the panic clawing at their mind. The shadows recoiled slightly, as if sensing the shift in their resolve. "You need me," Alex said, their voice firm. "You can't exist without people like me." The builder's laughter faltered, replaced by a low growl. "You're wrong," it said, but there was an edge of uncertainty in its tone. "No, I'm not," Alex continued, stepping forward. The shadows parted slightly as if unsure how to respond. "Without fear, you're nothing, and I'm not afraid of you anymore." The room trembled, the walls vibrating violently as the builder roared. The shadows surged toward Alex, but this time they didn't flinch. They stood their ground, their gaze fixed on the darkness. The builder's form began to flicker, its presence weakening as Alex's fear drained away. "I'm taking back control," Alex said, their voice steady. "You don't own me. You never did." The fractured stone on the floor began to glow faintly, its pieces vibrating as if responding to Alex's resolve. The shadows writhed, their movements frantic, and the builder's voice became a whisper, weak and fading. "This isn't over." Alex reached down and picked up the largest shard of the stone. It was warm now, pulsing gently in their hand. Without hesitation, they held it high and drove it into the floor. A blinding light erupted from the point of impact, consuming the room in a wave of energy that felt like a release, a cleansing. When the light faded, Alex found themselves standing in the apartment once more. The walls were still and solid, the oppressive atmosphere gone. The fractured stone was gone, its remnants absorbed into the light. The room felt empty but peaceful, as if the building had finally been freed from the builder's grip. Alex walked to the window and looked outside. The view was normal again, just a quiet street bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. They took a deep breath, the air crisp and clean, and allowed themselves a moment of relief. The knocking didn't return, The shadows didn't stir. For the first time since they'd moved in, the apartment felt like a place to call home. But as Alex stepped into the hallway, ready to leave the building for good, a faint whisper reached their ears. The story isn't over. Not yet. They turned sharply, but the hallway was empty. Shaking their head, Alex walked away, vowing never to look back.